Hello and welcome to Miss Clark Reads to You. I am on the Student. We are going to learn in the Kindle version of Tuesdays with Morrie about Mitch Albom, the narrator, and the author. At this point, I should explain what had happened to me since that summer day when I last hugged my dear and wise professor and promised to keep in touch. I did not keep in touch. In fact, I lost contact with most of the people I knew in college, including my beer-drinking friends and the first woman I ever woke up with in the morning. The years after graduation hardened me into someone quite different from from the strutting graduate who left campus that day, headed for New York City, ready to offer the world his talent. The world, I discovered, was not all that interested. I wandered around my early 20s, paying rent, reading classifieds, and wondering why the lights were not turning green for me. My dream was to be a famous musician. I played the piano. But after several years of dark, empty nightclubs, broken promises, bands that kept breaking up, and producers who seemed excited about everyone but me, the dream soured. I was failing for the first time in my life. And at the same time, I had my first serious encounter with death. My favorite uncle, my mother's brother, the man who had taught me music, taught me to drive, teased me about girls, thrown me a football, that one adult whom I targeted as a child and said, "That's who I want to be when I grow up," died of pancreatic cancer at the age of 44. He was a short, handsome man with a thick mustache, and I was with him for the last year of his life, living in an apartment just below his. I watched his strong body wither, then bloat, saw him suffer night after night, doubled over at the kitchen table, pressing on his stomach, his eyes shut, his mouth contorted in pain. "Oh, God," he would moan. "Oh, Jesus." The rest of us, my aunt, his two young sons, me, stood there silently cleaning the plates, averting our eyes. It was the most helpless I've ever felt in my life. One night in May, my uncle and I sat on the balcony of his apartment. It was breezy and warm. He looked out toward the horizon and said through gritted teeth that he wouldn't be around to see his kids into the next school year. And he asked if I would look after them. And I told him not to talk that way. He stared at me sadly. He died a few weeks later. After the funeral, my life changed. I felt as if time were suddenly precious and water going down an open drain. Another great metaphor. Mitch Albom is quite talented in similes and metaphors to get us to a clearer understanding of his of the way this thing has an emotional impact. His life, life, has an emotional impact. His life was water going down an open drain. And I could not move quickly enough. No more playing music at half-empty nightclubs. No more writing songs in my apartment. Songs that no one would hear. I returned to school. I earned a master's degree in journalism and took the first job offered as a sports writer. Instead of chasing my own fame, I wrote about famous athletes and chasing theirs. I worked for newspapers and freelanced for magazines. I worked at a pace that knew no hours and no limits. I would wake up in the morning, brush my teeth, and sit down at the typewriter in the same clothes I had slept in. My uncle had worked for a corporation and hated it. Same thing, every day. And I was determined never to end up like him. I bounced around from New York to Florida and eventually took a job in Detroit as a columnist for the Detroit Free Press. The sports appetite in that city was insatiable. They had professional teams in football, basketball, baseball, and hockey, and it matched my ambition. In a few years, I was not only penning columns or writing columns, I was writing sports books, doing radio shows, and appearing regularly on TV, spouting my opinion on rich football players and hypocritical college sports programs. I was part of the media thunderstorm that now soaks our country. I was in demand. And so I stopped renting and I started buying. I bought a house on a hill, I bought cars, I invested in stocks and built a portfolio. I was cranked into fifth gear, and everything I did on a deadline. I exercised like a demon. I drove my car at breakneck speed. I made more money than I ever figured to see. And I met a dark-haired woman named Janine who somehow loved me despite my schedule and the constant absences. We married after a 7-year courtship. I was back to work a week after the wedding. I told her, and myself, that we would start a family one day, something she wanted very much. But that day never came. Instead, I buried myself in accomplishments because with accomplishments, I believed I could control things. I could squeeze in every last piece of happiness before I got sick and died like my uncle before me, which I figured was my natural fate. As for Morrie, well, I thought about him now and then, the things he taught me about being human and relating to others. But it was always in the distance, as if from another life. And over the years, I threw away any mail that came from Brandeis University, figuring they were only asking for money, and so I did not know of Morrie's illness. The people who might have told me were long forgotten, their phone numbers buried in some packed away box in the attic. It might have stayed that way had I not been flicking through the TV channels late one night when something caught my ear. So that's the end of The Student. And we know a bit about his career. He became a sports writer. He married Janine, despite being absent because he was so busy with working. He fell in love with her, and she fell in love with him. And then that particular section ends with, when something caught my ear. Now, right after ear is this ellipsis. So this ellipsis signals to us that something is coming. It's like that light bulb moment we've talked about before, that, he wasn't going to realize the immensity of it until much later in the story. And here it is in the audiovisual. In March of 1995, a limousine carrying Ted Koppel, the host of ABC TV's Nightline, pulled up to the snow-covered curb outside Morrie's house in West Newton, Massachusetts. Morrie was in a wheelchair full-time now, getting used to helpers lifting him like a heavy sack from a chair to the bed, to the bed, to the chair. He had begun to cough while eating, and chewing was a chore. His legs were dead. He would never walk again. Yet he refused to be depressed. Instead, Morrie had become a lightning rod of ideas. He jotted down his thoughts on yellow pads, envelopes, folders, scrap paper. He wrote bite-sized philosophies about living with death's shadow. Accept what you're able to do and what you're not able to do. Accept the past as past without denying or discarding it. Learn to forgive yourself and forgive others. Don't assume that it's too late to get involved. After a while, he had more than 50 of these aphorisms, which he shared with his friends. One friend, a fellow Brandeis professor named Morrie Stein, was so taken with the words that he sent them to a Boston Globe reporter who came out and wrote a long feature story on Morrie. The headline wrote, "A Professor's Final Course, His Own Death." The article caught the eye of a producer from the Nightline show who brought it to Koppel in Washington, D.C. "Take a look at this," the producer said. And the next thing you know, They were cameramen in Morrie's living room, and Koppel's limousine was in front of the house. Now, this is a big deal. So today, what's his name? Grace, the Price is Right. Not the Price is Right, the Family Feud. What's the host's name? Grace. What? Steve Harvey. So Steve Harvey, this would be equivalent to having Steve Harvey, having Ted Koppel in 1995 come to Morrie's house and interview him to ask him about his life and his experience with ALS and all of these aphorisms. So I want you to think about this. This is no small person. This is a multi-million-dollar figure who shows up at Morrie's little house in Massachusetts. Several of Morrie's friends and family members had gathered to meet Koppel, and when the famous man entered the house, they buzzed with excitement, all except Morrie, who wheeled himself forward, raised his eyebrows, and interrupted the clamor with his high sing-song voice. "Ted, I need to check you out before I agree to do this interview." And there was an awkward moment of silence. Then the two men were ushered into the study, and the door was shut. "Man," one friend whispered outside the door, "I hope Ted goes easy on Morrie." "I hope Morrie goes easy on Ted," said the other. Inside the office, Morrie motioned for Koppel to sit down. He crossed his hand on his lap and smiled. "Tell me something close to your heart," Morrie began. "My heart?" Koppel studied the old man. "All right." He spoke about his children, and they were close to his heart, weren't they? "Good," Morrie said. "Now tell me something about your faith." Koppel was uncomfortable. "I usually don't talk about such things with people I've only known for a few minutes." "Ted, I'm dying," Morrie said, peering over his glasses. "I don't have a lot of time here." Koppel laughed. "All right, faith." And he quoted a passage from Marcus Aurelius, something he felt strongly about. Morrie nodded. "Now, let me ask you something," Koppel said. "Have you ever seen my program?" Morrie shrugged. "Twice, I think." "Twice? That's all?" "Oh, don't feel bad. I've only seen Oprah once." "Well, the 2 times you saw my show, what did you think?" Morrie paused. "To be honest?" "Yes." "I thought you were a narcissist." Koppel burst into laughter. "I am too ugly to be a narcissist," he said. And we'll stop there with the audiovisual, and we will pick up there next time. I hope you are enjoying Tuesdays with Morrie, and especially enjoying Morrie's spectacular, charismatic personality. This has only just begun. He is the best teacher who has ever lived, in my opinion. I look forward to reading to you again, and I hope you are doing really well. Thank you for joining me.